Big Fani Willis sent a letter over to Congress, and we read through it here, and she was very irritated. She had a little bit of a bad attitude on that one. She was telling Jim Jordan and all the people in Congress that you guys get the heck out of my office. She says, this is a state-level proceeding. You have no business interfering and sticking your nose in what we're doing here in my Big Fani office. And Jordan is now responding. And when we read through Big Fani's letter, we were actually taken aback by it. We were like, I can't believe she said all this stuff to Congress. And she did, because she is the biggest Fani in Georgia, and she knows nobody's going to tell her what to do. This is the response from Jim Jordan and Congress, the Committee on the Judiciary, back over to Big Fani Willis. And this should be a burner. Let's see what's inside. The Honorable Fani Willis. This letter comes from the Judiciary Committee and Jim Jordan, the chairman of that committee. And he says in response to Big Fani, he says, hey, Fani, we received your letter from September, and your letter reinforces our concern about your prosecutorial misconduct, saying we think it's geared more towards advancing a political cause and your own notoriety than towards promoting fair justice. We, Congress, have a strong legislative issue, in particular, making sure that popularly elected prosecutors do not misuse their law enforcement authority for political reasons. We can only conclude from your hostile response, which is absolutely a correct word, that you are actively and aggressively engaged in the scheme. So contrary to the arguments in your letter, this matter does not only implicate local or state interests. It's not only your business, Fani. Rather, indicting former presidents and other former officials absolutely implicates substantial federal interests. If local prosecutors can just engage in politically motivated prosecutions while they're in office, it might impact how those federal officers choose to behave. In fact, in the full report that your grand jury put out, you contemplated an even more extensive intrusion into federal interest. You were targeting U.S. senators like Lindsey Graham, including ranking members on the Judiciary Committee ourselves. Now, obviously, she didn't decide to indict Lindsey Graham because she probably knew that it would have opened up a whole can of worms here. But in her letter, Jordan responds, says many of your baseless assertions raised in your letter have already been considered and dealt with, including by the Supreme Court. But we're going to provide this information to help you understand how this all works. Hey, Fani, the committee has a constitutional authority to oversee and, in particular, identify politically motivated prosecutions. Many people have found this. The Constitution in Article 1 says it. The Supreme Court says we can investigate this. The Southern District of New York says we can investigate this. Your letter says that our committee is obstructing Georgia's criminal proceeding. You, Fani, are wrong. The Supreme Court has said the opposite. In fact, we can also investigate hypothetical future legislation based on any speculation that we want. And similarly, Fani, your reliance upon Mazars, another case, is totally misplaced. You asserted that our oversight implicates federalism and the separation of powers concerns, but you identified the wrong standard. It's not Mazars, it's Wilkinson. Hello, Wilkinson is a three-pronged test, saying that if the committee's investigation, if it's a broad subject matter area, we're allowed to do it if it's authorized by Congress, if it has a valid legislative purpose, and if it has been authorized. We can do it. And this oversight in your Big Fani case obviously meets those three criteria. And so we are authorized to conduct this inquiry. Rule 10 of our own rules authorizes us to do this. And so there is no serious argument that this inquiry does not involve Congress. Notwithstanding your unsupported assertion to the contrary, Fani, this committee's oversight absolutely has legitimate purposes. For example, in your indictment, you appear to rely on conduct undertaken by federal officers in their official capacities. They were doing things like making phone calls, engaging in communications, arranging meetings, and so on. But you called all of those federal acts overt acts, and you charged them under RICO out of Georgia. So your reliance on these official actions in your criminal indictment raises concerns because now you're criminalizing lawful actions. You've also created a new novel question with respect to the federal removal statute. And so the committee, we could possibly develop legislative reforms to go through and inquire and investigate and pass legislation to address these problems. So your decision, Fani, to indict a former president also raises the potential for a conflict between feds and state authorities. Federal law requires the Secret Service to protect a former president. Therefore, your indictment also raises a conflict between state people and federal people who have to protect Trump. Such a collision of competing law enforcement interests is something which we can obviously legislate. In addition, as we originally explained, Fani, the committee has has an interest in how law enforcement agencies spend federal money, and so we're going to look into that. Now, we also have found credible reports that your agency coordinated with Jack Smith. Oh, that's footnote 30. That is from the Washington Examiner, Josh Gerstein. The committee must understand the coordination and may consider legislative reforms to address that. Now, they say that all of our requests to your office, Fani, are very pertinent to the inquiry, okay? We're not asking you for things that are outside of scope. And this is not an encroachment upon your state's rights. Don't tell us that this is a separation of powers argument. You love federal government impinging upon state rights. You're a Democrat. You also asserted that the committee is attempting to intrude upon Georgia. No, they say it doesn't. As an initial matter, we're requesting documents and communications from your office, including those that went over to Jack Smith. If they don't exist, you don't have to produce anything. But if they do exist, well, then you do. You cannot decline to produce responsive records to protect your state's sovereignty theory. Your assertion is not valid according to this case law. You concede that Congress is not a federal court. We're simply seeking information. That's all. We're not forcing you to do anything. We just want info. So moreover, they say, contrary to your assertions, our requests do not trigger this concept called deliberative due process. And we're also here, Fani, we're not usurping executive powers in any way, shape, or form. In your letter, you say that we are, but the Supreme Court has made clear that we're not. It may be conceded that Congress is without authority to compel disclosures for the purpose of aiding a prosecution of pending suits. But the authority of that body, directly or through its own committees, to require disclosures in aid of its own constitutional power is not abridged if that information may be used in other suits. So your refusal to cooperate with oversight is unpersuasive. And so, Fani, the committee does require additional information to conduct our oversight. Although we appreciate that you produced to the committee a rough spreadsheet outlining several federal grants that your office got, Fed money, this spreadsheet alone does not satisfy our requests. The committee is also examining whether legislative reforms are necessary to insulate former and current presidents against politically motivated prosecution witch hunts by state and local officials like you. As such, the committee requires additional material to adequately carry out your oversight. So accordingly, we reiterate our requests as accommodation to you. We are willing to prioritize the production of documents reflecting your coordination between the DOJ and Jack Smith. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Jim Jordan. All right, so man, I was hoping we would see one final sentence here, or our paragraph, something that says something. If you fail to comply, the next steps will be a compulsory process and we will not hesitate to use a subpoena, right? Something like that. But that might be the next letter. You know, sometimes it takes about 5 letters before we get to the subpoena. But Congress responding to Big Fani Willis saying, we want to know about your collusion with Jack Smith. We want to know about your federal money that you received and all of the operations in your office that was prosecuting federal officials, including chiefs of staff, senators, and former presidents. Big Fani Willis getting into it with Jim Jordan. We'll continue to cover, my friends. Thank you for subscribing and sharing this video with a friend, and we'll see you on the next one.